The rise of the Varangian Guard, Vikings in the Byzantine Empire. In the flickering torchlight of Constantinople's great palace, a Norse warrior's axe caught the gleam of Byzantine gold. It was 989 AD, and Emperor Basil II had just made the most consequential military decision of the medieval world. He would entrust his life to the most feared warriors of the age. These were not mere soldiers for hire, they were the Varangian Guard, an elite force of Viking mercenaries who would become the deadliest personal guard in history. Within their ranks stood future kings, legendary warriors, and master spies who would shape the fate of two empires. From the frozen fjords of Scandinavia to the marble halls of Constantinople, this is the story of how a band of Norse warriors became the most trusted killers in the Byzantine Empire. They were men who drank deeply, fought savagely, and died with honor. But above all, they were the emperor's most lethal weapon, wielded with precision in a deadly game of power that would determine the fate of medieval civilization. Their tale is one of blood oaths and battle axes, of vast riches and brutal betrayals, and of how the most feared warriors of the North became the last line of defense for the world's most sophisticated empire. From the frozen north, Harald Hardrada stood at the prow of his longship as it cut through the Bosphorus Strait in 1034, his eyes fixed on the gleaming walls of Constantinople. He was 18, already a veteran of countless battles, and about to join the most elite fighting force in the known world. Behind him, 30 Norwegian warriors gripped their axes, their mail shirts catching the Mediterranean sun, so different from the pale light of their homeland. They had journeyed 2,000 miles from Norway, fighting and raiding their way down the rivers of Russia, each man carrying tales of their own bloodied path to Miklagard, the great city as the Norse called it. The Byzantines had learned a harsh lesson about the warriors of the north in 860 AD, when the Rus raiders had nearly sacked Constantinople. Rather than fight these brutal warriors, Emperor Basil II had made a revolutionary decision. He would recruit them. The Norsemen's reputation for ferocity was matched only by their fame for absolute loyalty once their word was given. In a court where poison and silk-wrapped daggers were more common than honest swords, the emperor needed men who could not be bribed, could not be seduced, and could not be turned against him by Byzantine political machinations. The selection process was brutally simple. Every warrior who sought to join the Varangian Guard had to survive 3 challenges: a test of strength, where they fought with weighted weapons until exhaustion; a test of loyalty, where Byzantine gold was offered as a bribe to betray their future oath; and a test of wit, where they had to detect a potential assassin in a crowded royal reception. Many died during these trials. Those who survived became something more than mere soldiers. They became living weapons, sworn to die before allowing harm to reach their emperor. In the decades that followed, Harald and his fellow Varangians would demonstrate why they were worth their weight in gold. During the day, they stood like statues beside the imperial throne, their enormous Danish axes gleaming. At night, they patrolled the labyrinthine palace corridors, their heavy boots echoing on marble floors as a warning to would-be assassins. But it was in battle where they truly earned their fearsome reputation. Unlike other Byzantine units that relied on careful tactics and formation warfare, the Varangians were unleashed like wolves when the fighting was thickest. They fought in the Old Norse way, with berserker fury tempered by iron discipline. These men had crossed an empire to reach Constantinople, but their greatest battles still lay ahead. For Harald Hardrada and his fellow Varangians, this was just the beginning of a story that would be told in sagas for centuries to come. The Byzantine Emperors had purchased the loyalty of the North's most dangerous warriors, and in doing so, they had changed the course of medieval warfare forever. The Emperor's Shadow. The marble halls of the great palace held a peculiar silence at dawn. This was the hour when the Varangians conducted their most sacred duty, the ceremonial inspection of the emperor's chambers. 2 guards moved like shadows through the imperial apartments, checking every corner, every curtain, and every seemingly innocent vase. They knew better than most that in Constantinople, death often came disguised as beauty. Their massive frames, usually adorned in gleaming mail and scarlet cloaks, were now stripped down to leather and wool, the better to hear the whisper of a hidden blade or the soft footfall of an assassin. The Varangians' deadly reputation wasn't built on brute force alone. Their training transformed Norse warriors into something entirely new, a hybrid of Viking ferocity and Byzantine sophistication. Each guard learned to read and write in Greek, to recognize the subtle indicators of poisoned wine, and to navigate the labyrinthine protocols of the most sophisticated court in Christendom. But their most fearsome skill remained their mastery of the Dane axe, a weapon so massive that most men could barely lift it. In Varangian hands, these 5-foot-long axes became instruments of terrible precision. They could shear through shield, armor, and flesh in a single strike, or hook an enemy's weapon with the reverse spike. The guards' training grounds beneath the palace walls witnessed techniques found nowhere else in medieval warfare. Here, Viking weaponcraft merged with Roman military science. Guards learned to fight in the tight formations favored by the Byzantines while wielding their Nordic weapons. They practiced blindfolded to sharpen their other senses, trained with weighted weapons to build supernatural endurance, and studied human anatomy to understand exactly where their axes would strike with maximum effect. But perhaps their most unusual training involved learning to fight in the confined spaces of palace corridors, where their massive axes should have been useless. They developed a specialized form of close-quarter combat that turned architectural features into weapons. Columns became pivot points for devastating axe swings, and tapestries could be used to entangle and disorient attackers. By 1040, the Varangian Guard had become so effective that their mere presence could prevent assassination attempts. During the coronation of Emperor Constantine IX, a group of Armenian conspirators abandoned their plot after witnessing the Guard's morning training session. The sight of 40 massive Norsemen wielding their axes with surgical precision, splitting practice dummies in half with mechanical regularity, convinced the would-be assassins to reconsider their career choices. The Varangians had achieved what no other military unit in history had managed. They had made themselves so terrifying that they could win battles without drawing blood. The price for this excellence was paid in sweat and pain. For every 10 warriors who attempted to join the Guard, only 1 would survive the training. Those who succeeded became something unique in medieval history, warriors who could discuss Greek philosophy while cleaving a man in half, bodyguards who could detect poison by the way light reflected off wine, and soldiers who combined Viking battle fury with Byzantine tactical precision. They were the Emperor's shadow, always present, always watching, and always ready to unleash precisely measured violence in defense of their lord. More than muscle. In the spring of 1042, as dawn broke over Constantinople, a Varangian guardsman named Thorkel stood motionless in an alcove, listening to a whispered conversation in Persian. The speakers, a silk merchant and a palace eunuch, had no idea that this seemingly illiterate Norse warrior understood every word of their plot to assassinate Emperor Constantine IX. The Varangians had long since learned that their reputation for being mere barbaric warriors was their greatest asset in gathering intelligence. Who would suspect that these massive ale-drinking Norsemen were also some of Byzantium's most effective spies? The Guard's intelligence network stretched from the brothels of the Galata district to the highest levels of the imperial court. They exploited a unique advantage. Constantinople's merchants, politicians, and plotters would freely discuss their schemes in front of Varangian guards, assuming these simple warriors couldn't understand their refined languages. But the guards' mandatory language training meant they comprehended not just Greek, but Persian, Armenian, and Arabic. They became the empire's ears, collecting whispers and secrets while standing silent vigil in palace corridors. When a group of Bulgarian conspirators plotted against Emperor Romanos III in 1028, they were stunned to find Varangian axes at their door before they could act, their careful plans, discussed openly in Bulgarian before the deaf Norse guards had sealed their fate. The guards' role in Byzantine intelligence operations went far beyond passive surveillance. They maintained a network of informants throughout the city, paying in gold scraped from their considerable salaries. Their investigations were brutally effective. When traditional questioning failed, few could resist the sight of a Varangian slowly sharpening his axe while asking polite questions in perfect Greek. They developed a sophisticated system of coded messages, passed through seemingly innocent gestures during their ceremonial duties. A shifted stance, a tilted axe, or an adjusted cloak could signal vital intelligence to their compatriots without breaking their famous silence. Their greatest triumph came in 1057 during an assassination plot that nearly succeeded. A coalition of Armenian nobles and disgruntled generals had placed their agents throughout the palace, coordinating through a series of seemingly innocent trade messages. But the guards' agents had noticed an unusual pattern in silk shipments from Armenian merchants. Thorkel and his fellow guardsmen spent months tracking the conspiracy, using their merchants' knowledge to decipher the coded trade logs. On the very night the assassins struck, they found not a vulnerable emperor, but a trap of Norse steel. The plotters had fallen victim to their own prejudices, never suspecting that the simple Varangian guards had not only understood their plots, but had been manipulating them for months. The Varangian Guard had evolved far beyond their original role as elite bodyguards. They had become something unprecedented in medieval history, a combination of personal protection force, intelligence service, and counter-espionage unit. Their success stemmed from an extraordinary ability to be simultaneously highly visible and invisible, to be seen as mere brutal warriors while operating as sophisticated agents of imperial security. In a city famous for its spies and secrets, the Varangians proved that sometimes the best place to hide was in plain sight, standing silent and watchful, their axes gleaming in the candlelight while they listened to the whispers that could shake an empire. The Golden Age of the Varangian Guard. The year 999 marked the apex of Varangian power, as Emperor Basil II prepared for his most ambitious campaign yet. The morning sun glinted off 600 Varangian axes as they marched from Constantinople toward Bulgaria. This wasn't just another military expedition, it was the beginning of Byzantium's greatest expansion, and the Varangians would be its spearhead. Basil II, known as the Bulgar Slayer, had transformed his Norse guardsmen from a palace protection force into an elite shock infantry that would help him nearly double the empire's size. At the Battle of Clydion in 1014, the Varangians demonstrated why they had become the most feared military unit in the medieval world. The Bulgarian army had fortified the mountain passes, creating what they thought was an impregnable position. In the pre-dawn hours, a select group of Varangians scaled the cliffs that the Bulgarians had deemed unclimbable, their axes doubling as climbing tools. As the morning mist cleared, Bulgarian soldiers looked up to find Norse giants descending upon them from above, their axes already bloody from the dispatched sentries. The guards' attack threw the Bulgarian army into chaos, leading to a victory so complete that it broke the back of Bulgarian resistance and earned Basil his fearsome nickname. The guards' reputation reached its zenith during the campaigns in Syria and Armenia. At the siege of Aleppo in 1000, they breached the city's supposedly impregnable walls, using a tactic that combined Viking ingenuity with Byzantine engineering. Working through the night, they constructed a massive shield wall of interlocked shields, but with a crucial Norse modification. They overlapped their massive axes to create a crude but effective mobile battering ram. The sight of these warrior engineers advancing under their shield of steel and blade was too much for Aleppo's defenders, who surrendered rather than face the guard in close combat. By 1025, the Varangian Guard had helped Basil II expand Byzantine territory from Italy to the Caucasus. They had evolved beyond mere warriors into the empire's premier problem solvers, combining Norse courage with Byzantine tactical sophistication. During the Armenian campaigns, they developed new techniques for mountain warfare, using their axes to cut steps in frozen slopes and creating improvised avalanches to clear mountain passes. In the Syrian deserts, they adapted their heavy fighting style to the terrain, learning to fight at dawn and dusk, using the low sun to blind their opponents while their own helmets were specially modified with deep visors. But the Guard's greatest achievement came not in conquest, but in inspiration. Their effectiveness led to a revolution in military thinking throughout the medieval world. Their unique combination of individual combat prowess and unit cohesion became a model studied from Baghdad to Paris. Even their enemies began copying their techniques, though none could quite replicate the devastating combination of Viking ferocity and Byzantine discipline that made the Varangians unique. Under Basil II, they had helped create the largest empire Europe had seen since the fall of Rome, and in doing so, they had changed the very nature of medieval warfare. Warriors and wealth. Inside the Chrysotriklinos, the golden reception hall of the Great Palace, stood the Varangians' most coveted privilege: direct access to the imperial treasury. Every guardsman received payment not in common coins, but in pure gold numismata, the reserve currency of medieval Europe. When Harald Hardrada finally returned to Norway in 1042, his accumulated wealth was so vast that his men needed 2 ships to carry it. The Varangians' legendary wages spawned a saying in the Norse world: to go to Miklagard is to guarantee your grandchildren's wealth. But the true magnitude of Varangian privilege went far beyond mere salary. They held exclusive rights to Polutasvarf, the stripping of the emperor's chambers upon his death. When Emperor Constantine VIII died in 1028, the Guard entered his private quarters and methodically collected everything of value, from gold-threaded tapestries to jewel-encrusted furniture. This sanctioned looting was no mere theft, it was a sophisticated insurance policy. By allowing the Varangians to profit from an emperor's death only through legitimate means, Byzantium's rulers had effectively removed any financial incentive for assassination. The Guard's economic influence extended into Constantinople's bustling markets, where they operated under unique commercial privileges. They were exempt from the usual trading restrictions, allowing them to act as merchants when off duty. Many guardsmen became shrewd traders, using their multilingual skills and cross-cultural connections to broker deals between Norse merchants and Byzantine traders. Their commercial network stretched from the Black Sea to the Baltic, creating a trade route that would outlive the Guard itself. Some historians argue that the Varangians did more to integrate the economies of Northern Europe and the Mediterranean than any other single group in medieval history. Their wealth also transformed them into medieval venture capitalists. Varangian veterans often funded trading expeditions to their homeland, creating a complex web of commercial relationships that bound together the economies of Scandinavia and Byzantium. They financed shipbuilding in Norse ports, invested in Baltic amber trades, and even funded the construction of churches both in Constantinople and their native lands. The famous Hagia Sophia contains carved runic inscriptions from Varangian investors who contributed to its restoration, a testament to their role not just as warriors, but as economic power brokers in medieval Europe. Yet despite their immense wealth, the Varangians maintained their legendary discipline. While other mercenary units might grow soft with riches, the Guard viewed their prosperity as a sacred trust, earned through unwavering loyalty and paid for in blood. Their luxury was not in how they spent their wealth, but in the security it provided their families back home. A Varangian's gold bought not palaces in Constantinople, but farms in Norway, trading ships in Sweden, and a future for their children. In creating the wealthiest warrior elite in medieval history, Byzantium had ensured that their loyalty was guaranteed not just by honor, but by the practical mathematics of prosperity. The last stand of the Varangian Guard. April 12, 1204. The morning air filled with smoke as the Crusader army breached Constantinople's walls. In the chaos that followed, a band of Varangian guardsmen made their final stand in front of the Hagia Sophia. They had sworn to protect the church's treasures, even as the city crumbled around them. The Fourth Crusade had brought something the Varangians had never faced before, fellow Norsemen fighting under a different banner. Among the Crusaders were their own distant cousins, Norman knights whose ancestors had also once served as mercenaries. Now, axe would meet axe in a clash that would mark the end of an era. The Guard's final battle became the stuff of legend. As Latin knights poured through the streets, 200 Varangians formed a shield wall on the steps of the Hagia Sophia. They fought with the desperate fury of men defending not just a building, but 1,000 years of civilization. The chronicles record that the pile of fallen crusaders grew so high that the surviving attackers had to climb over their dead to reach the Guard's line. Even as the great church burned behind them, the Varangians held their position until the very treasures they were protecting could be evacuated through underground passages. Their end came not through defeat in battle, but through the collapse of the empire they had served. When Constantinople fell to the Latin Crusaders, the surviving Varangians faced an impossible choice. Some accepted service under the new Latin Empire, though they considered it a pale imitation of the power they had once served. Others took ship for distant shores, carrying their axes and their secrets to new lands. A handful made their way to the Byzantine successor state of Nicaea, where they would serve the empire in exile, clinging to the hope of eventual restoration. The Guard's dissolution marked more than the end of a military unit. It was the death of a unique cultural bridge between North and South, East and West. The Varangians had been more than mercenaries. They were living proof that the seemingly unbridgeable gaps between Viking and Roman, pagan and Christian, barbarian and civilized could be crossed. Their disappearance marked the beginning of a more rigidly divided medieval world, where such cultural fusion would become increasingly rare. Yet even in their fall, the Varangians maintained their legendary loyalty. The last recorded act of the Guard was not a battle, but a vigil. In the days after Constantinople's capture, while the city burned and the victors celebrated, a group of Varangians stood watch over the tomb of Emperor Constantine. They kept their final oath until death or capture took them, guarding the memory of an empire that had already ceased to exist. The last Varangian watchmen disappeared into history much as they had lived, standing silent guard, axes in hand, faithful to the end to an ideal of service that transcended mere payment or power. Echoes of the Axe, the legacy of the Varangian Guard. The Varangian Guard vanished from history's stage, but their influence echoed through centuries like the ring of an axe on shield. In the decades following Constantinople's fall, tales of their prowess spawned a new genre of Norse literature. The sagas spoke of Miklagard's warrior kings, who returned home with gold-hilted swords and wisdom earned in marble halls. These stories transformed Norse military culture, No longer were raiders and pirates considered the height of martial achievement. The Varangian ideal of the warrior scholar, equally comfortable wielding an axe or discussing philosophy in multiple languages, became the new standard for military excellence. Their legacy lived on in unexpected ways. The Guard's unique fighting techniques surfaced in military manuals from medieval Russia to Renaissance Italy. Their distinctive method of using the long axe influenced European polearm combat for generations. In Sweden, surviving Varangian veterans established military academies that combined physical training with languages and mathematics, a revolutionary approach that prefigured modern military education by centuries. Perhaps most surprisingly, their economic innovations endured long after their martial prowess was forgotten. The trade routes they established between Scandinavia and the Mediterranean remained active until the 16th century, and their system of using warriors as trade agents was copied by military orders throughout Europe. But perhaps the Varangians' most enduring legacy was the proof that fierce loyalty could be bought not through fear or mere gold, but through a combination of privilege, responsibility, and respect. They demonstrated that barbarians could become the guardians of civilization, that cultural differences could be bridged through mutual respect, and that the fiercest warriors could also be the most reliable peacekeepers. As modern armies continue to grapple with questions of loyalty, cultural integration, and the warrior-scholar ideal, the echoes of Varangian innovation still resonate. In the end, their greatest achievement was not the battles they won or the wealth they accumulated, but the example they set, that the gap between different worlds could be bridged by those brave enough to cross it.